Hey there, and welcome back to another video from Open Learn Sec. My name is Jono, and I'm learning about cybersecurity. I'm documenting this learning process in the open in the hopes that it'll help other people who are interested in learning about security. Today, we're going to build a Kali virtual machine. This is a pretty fundamental step in being able to get hands-on with security tools, participate in practical learning exercises like Hack the Box or something similar, and just establishing an all-purpose environment for furthering your own security journey. So not only are we going to build the virtual machine running Kali Linux, but at the end, I'm going to walk through some steps for the customizations of the Kali environment that I like. I'm a pretty heavy user of Linux desktop day to day, and so I like to tune and tweak things to my preference. So I'll share some of those with you. Mainly it's around being able to navigate and drive through the GUI using the keyboard more than the mouse. So it's about setting up lots of keyboard shortcuts and those sorts of things. As always, the notes for this video are available at openlearnsec.com. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Okay, a quick agenda for today. We're going to talk about what is Kali Linux, a bit of a review of the project itself, so we understand the history and how Kali is put together. The next step will be, if you don't already have it, you're going to need some sort of virtual machine hypervisor. So this is a piece of software that runs on either your Windows or Mac desktop or laptop as well. And this will be the container where we host our virtual machine, and that's where we're going to install Kali. So the next step after installing the hypervisor is we're going to create an empty virtual machine. So this is the basic steps, just about allocating resources, telling the machine how to boot, these sorts of things. Once we've got that empty virtual machine, we're going to actually install Kali from scratch. This is rather than using a pre-baked VM. We'll get into the reasons why later on. And finally, an optional step. I mean, if you get to here installing Kali Linux, then really you've got a functional working environment on your desktop that you can start to use. But if you want to go a little bit further, we'll talk about some of those customizations that I mentioned, just something that I like to do personally. So let's dive into what is Kali. Well, here's the homepage. We can see that it's marketed as a open source Linux distribution that's targeted at professional pen testers. And while this is true, and it's often the platform that's used by people who do pen testing for a living, it's really useful for students and people who are just interested in or want to learn more about security. And that's really from both the red team and the blue team perspective. So if you haven't heard those terms before, red team, blue team, it generally refers to the red team being the attackers and the blue team being the defenders. So you can see here that it's also geared towards other types of security users or personas. So security researchers doing forensics and reverse engineering. And that's really the power of Kali. It's a specialized Linux environment. That means a lot of the heavy lifting is done for you. So if you wanted to do security research or you were a pen tester, you could easily spend, hours and hours or even days getting a Linux distribution, finding all the tools that you use, installing them, configuring them, getting everything set up nicely. Whereas Kali provides a really good baseline for all of that. It doesn't have every single security related tool or product under the sun, but it is carefully curated. And that's what I really like about Kali, is it just gets you up and running and gets you a configuration where you're kind of immediately effective in whatever task you've got in front of you. So Kali was released in, Kali 1.0 was released in March 2013. That makes it now over a decade old, which is really cool. And the kind of key people involved with Kali from the Debian project themselves. So one of the maintainers from Debian is working full-time on Kali. A few other folks who went on to found OffSec Security, or sorry, OffSec, previously known as Offensive Security. If you haven't heard of OffSec, they publish the OSCP exam and the subsequent educational material that surrounds getting that certification. It's considered one of the more practical and more difficult certifications in the cybersecurity industry. So there's a really strong team behind it, and they base it off Debian. You can see at the top here they use Debian testing. So Debian has a fairly long release cycle, and Debian testing is generally more bleeding edge or leading edge, if you like. That's not to say it's unstable. It's just that they prefer this branch from Debian, which has a more up-to-date repository of packages. So basically anything that you can install on Debian, you'll be able to install on Kali, and it uses the same package management system, which is apt or apt. Kali takes this base Debian test repository, and then they make their own customizations to it. So they may take some of the Debian packages and fork them to add their own configuration or tweaks to make them, tune them and make them more specific to the Kali environment. They also then have a repository of additional packages. So these packages are not available on Debian, but are specifically published as a repository for Kali itself, and lots of optional software there, which doesn't necessarily get installed with the base, but can be easily installed because the package is just sitting there and it's one command to get it installed. So really, really helpful. Okay, so let's get started on running our own Kali Linux virtual machine. If you don't have any virtual machine hypervisor or virtual machine management software running on your machine, this step is for you. For many years, I used VirtualBox to run my various lab machines and different bits and pieces running on my local desktop. I have shied away from it because I just continually was chasing my tail with some stability issues, especially around graphics. So where I do have a desktop layer installed on a Linux VM, VirtualBox tended to give me a lot of issues. About 6 months ago, I switched over to VMware Workstation Player, and it's been really, really big difference. Just a lot more stability, not kind of trying to hunt down these weird problems and glitches and everything else. So I just use VMware Workstation Player. It's free for personal use, so you can download it if you're a student or studying, but keep in mind that for commercial use, they do ask for a license. So you can just Google up VMware Workstation Player, hit the download for free button, and it's going to walk you through the steps there. So just keep in mind also that this is specific for Linux and Windows, where the host operating system is Linux or Windows. If you want to run a Kali VM on Mac OS, as a lot of people seem to do these days, you need a different product altogether, which is called VMware Fusion Player. Now, I'm not sure why they differentiated it. I'm sure there's some logic behind it. But in either case, if you're on Mac OS, search for VMware Fusion Player, and that's the product that you want. You do need to go through some additional steps. You need to download it. You need to register and request a license, which is automatically issued, I believe. Just be aware that there's a few extra hoops to jump through. In terms of setting up the virtual machine itself and installing Kali, we're going to be going through the VMware Workstation Player flow. That said, the concepts roughly translate to Fusion, so you should be able to follow along. Just be aware that some of the windows and labels and names for things will look different. So I've already got VMware Workstation Player installed. I'm not going to walk through the actual installation process here. You just need to download it, get it installed, and then you're ready to take the next step. Next step, after we've got either Workstation Player or your choice of virtual machine management software, is to actually download Kali itself. So for that, all I'm going to do is open a new tab. I'm going to search for Get Kali, and the link is here. Super simple. We have lots and lots of different options. We got live boot. You can run it in Docker. You can run it under the Windows subsystem for Linux. If you're really game. You can deploy it on cloud. There's a mobile version of Kali called NetHunter, which is really cool. I'm yet to try it out. But the two key options are installer images, which is basically an ISO image. So it's installation media image for installing directly onto hardware. Maybe if you have an old laptop and you wanted to run Kali directly on the laptop rather than using a virtual machine, you could use the installer image and put that on a USB stick and then boot from that USB stick and install Kali that way. There's also pre-baked virtual machines. You can see here, they've got them for VMware, VirtualBox, Hyper-V, QEMU, lots of different options. And while this seems like a really straightforward and shortcut way to kind of do things, just download a VMware image, I prefer to have a little bit more control over the process myself. So my preference for building a virtual machine is to actually download the installer image. So you can see here, what we'll get is an ISO file. And when we boot our virtual machine, we will tell the virtual machine to boot from that ISO. So here it is. Got three choices: 64-bit, 32-bit, and ARM. So if you're using a Windows computer, 99% chance you just need the 64-bit version. If you're using a Mac computer or Mac hardware that's kind of more than, say, 2 years old, you'll probably want the 64-bit version as well. If you're using a more recent Mac that features the M1 or M2 chip, you're going to want the ARM version. Now, the reason for this is 64-bit is for Intel CPUs. If you're running Windows, it's likely that you're running either an Intel or AMD CPU, that is 64-bit. If you're running a more modern Mac laptop, say MacBook Air M1 or MacBook Pro M2, that's a different CPU architecture, so you need this ARM version. So just be wary of that. Probably only applies in a small number of cases. The 64-bit version is what's going to probably be right for most people. So we just hit the download link. We can download it via torrent if we like. I'm just going to do a direct download and hit that. And you can see it's on its way. I'm going to pause here while it downloads, and then we'll come back and we'll move on with the next step. All right, so through the power of editing, that download took about 18 minutes. Not too bad. I've got a pretty good internet connection here. If you do have a slower internet connection, the torrent option over here might be a good one for you. Okay, so just switch over to the VMware Workstation player. As I said, I've already got it installed. You can see I've got a couple of different VMs already here that I use day to day. And so we're going to create a new virtual machine. So we'll do File, New Virtual Machine. And it's going to create a wizard for us that lets us, gives us the prompts necessary to create this virtual machine. So the first step is to actually specify the ISO download location. So I've got it set here, but rather than type it in, you can just use this browse button. Now, VMware is going to say, could not detect which operating system is in this particular image. So that's not a problem. We'll sort that out as we move through the wizard here. And it's going to be Linux. And then version, we're going to select a later version of Debian. So Debian 64-bit. And hit next. Now it's time to give our virtual machine a name. I like to use different names depending on the occasion, but for this we'll use OpenLearn Sec Kali. And the initial hard drive size. So 20 gig is a good starting point. Usually I bump this up, let's say 30 GB. Leave this as default, whether it stores it as a single file or multiple files. And here we see all the defaults that have just been set through the wizard, and we have an option to customize hardware, but we'll come back and do that once the VM is created. So we hit finish. And you can see our new machine here, OpenLearn Sec-Kali. So what I'm going to do is right click and go to settings. We've already attached the ISO image, so it has somewhere to boot from. What I am going to do is give this some more memory. I've got lots of free memory installed on my machine, so I'm actually going to give it 4 gigs, which is 4096 meg. Number of processor cores, let's bump this up to 4. Now, this will depend on the hardware configuration of your host machine that VMware Player is running in. It's really up to you. I think a minimum of 3 gigs of memory is good because it is a GUI environment. That said, Linux is pretty lightweight compared to Windows. It can run on less resources, so 4 gigs of memory should be just fine. So I'm just going to hit OK. And now we simply right-click the machine and power on. And now we go to the boot phase of our new virtual machine. Get a rather nice beep there as the bootloader opens up. We can go for a graphical install. Just hit enter. And that's going to start the Kali Linux installation process. Okay. So there's lots of different options that you can set through this GUI installation process. I'm going to move through them pretty quickly, but like I said, I prefer to use the installer rather than the pre-baked virtual machine. For this reason, I get to tweak a few of these settings before it gets installed. So I'm going to continue with English, my location, American English keyboard. It's going to do some detection to see what hardware the virtual machine presents. And it's getting set up ready to perform the actual installation. So one step that we will have to go through is disk partitioning. If you've ever installed a Linux environment before, operating system before, either on hardware or in a virtual machine, you'll know that you need to configure how the device, how the hard disk is partitioned. That said, I'm going to leave it all as default because it chooses some pretty sane defaults. What I do like is to think about setting the host name here. So the host name is the local host name of the environment. So I'm just going to set it to openlearnsec. No domain name, I can just leave that blank. First user. So this is going to be my user that I log in as. I'm going to set the username to Jono. And continue. And now I'm going to have the opportunity to set a password for this first user. Let's choose Central Time. And here we go to the disk partition phase of the installation. Generally, the first option, guided, use entire disk. So this will just set a bunch of sane defaults for you. So we can just hit continue. Here is the virtual hard disk that VMware presents to the virtual machine. And all files in one partition, recommended for new users. Yep, super easy. And we're just going to finish the partitioning and actually write that to the disk. You do have to review and then select yes to commit the change because it is a destructive operation. But don't worry, it's just the virtual hard drive. It's not your actual system hard drive. So with all of those options set, Kali is now installing. It'll add the base system and then install a bunch of packages on top of that. So with that, I might just pause the video and come back once the installation process is finished. Okay, so the base system's been installed and now we get to choose some of the optional software that's installed on top of the base or the core. So desktop environment, we definitely want that. Like I mentioned, XFCE is the default window manager, so we'll just leave that as is. We will be tinkering with that later on in the customization section of this video. Top 10 most popular tools, default and recommended tools. Let's just leave all of that selected as is and continue the installation. installation has proceeded. It's installed all the software. The last step here is that it's asking to install a bootloader. So this is to manage the actual boot up process of the operating system. So we'll just leave it as default to use the grub bootloader. Continue. And we just select the device that's available here, which is our primary disk. And it will run through and install the bootloader. A couple of cleanup tasks to do. And then we can reboot the machine and log into our Kali VM for the first time. Okay, it's a great sight to see. So now we're going to log in with our user that we created during the setup process. So the installation's finished, machine's rebooted. So I'll just go ahead and get this launched. And up here in the VMware workstation, there's a little button in the toolbar that says enter full screen mode. So we can hit that. That should dynamically resize and fit the screen properly. Okay, so fresh install of Kali Linux. What's the first thing we do when we install any operating system? The first thing we do is apply the updates. Make sure it's fully up to date. So to do that, I'm just going to launch the terminal window, which is up here. And we can see we've got a terminal screen here. And because Kali is based on Debian, we just use the same commands that we would use to update a Debian system. So that's sudo apt update. And it will ask you for your password to escalate you to root privileges. And it's saying 804 packages can be upgraded. So this is the delta between when the installation ISO, the installation media was generated, and all of the packages that have been updated since then. So we just simply run apt upgrade, sudo apt upgrade, and it will tell us what needs to pull down. And we hit Y. And that's just going to take a few minutes to download all the various packages that are due for update. Make this a bit bigger. And we'll come back in a minute once these updates are done. All right, the update is done. That took a lot longer than I was anticipating. So it downloaded about 1.3 gig of package updates and took around 15, 20 minutes to download and install them all. So just be aware that this is not something you get done in sort of half an hour, 45 minutes. You need a little bit of time set aside to walk through this process. So now at this point, congratulations. You have an up-to-date working local virtual machine running Kali Linux. You're free to continue your learning, participate in CTFs, do some practical exercises like hack the box. You can do your own research and learn new stuff. But for me, I'm going to customize this Kali environment a little bit to match my own workflow. And like I mentioned, this mostly relates to the GUI and cosmetic changes. So let's dive in. So by default, the Kali desktop is powered by a window manager called XFCE, which is pretty lightweight. So it's easy on memory and resources. And it's a popular alternative to GNOME and KDE. You might remember during the installation options, we got to choose which window manager we wanted installed by default. So XFCE is a window manager. I guess you call it a Windows-like window manager. So every time you launch a new process or application, you can resize it, you can do things with it, you can stack them on top of each other, etc. And that's great, but I just find myself clicking around a lot. I do know that there's probably a way with XFCE to do what I'm trying to achieve, which is a tiling window manager. And I just haven't figured it out how to do it. And like I said, I use this alternative window manager in my other workflows day to day. So I'm going to try and make it consistent. So let's exit out of this terminal here. And what we'll do is install the necessary package to use this alternate window manager called i3. So we just do apt install i3. We use the sudo command. And it's going to run off and get the packages that we need. So we'll just let that continue. So i3 is definitely going to change the look and feel of how this desktop works. You can always go back to XFCE if you like. This is not a permanent decision, so maybe it's an interesting experiment to run with you. So I'm just going to close that terminal window there. And now I'm going to log out. So I go to the little icon in the top right and select log out. So now that I've logged out, I'm going to switch to a different window manager that I've just installed, which is i3. So you can see by default, we've got XFCE. So I'm going to select i3, type in my credentials and hit login. We're going to get a little prompt here that we don't have a config file. So I'll just hit enter and yes, generate the config for me. Now in XFCE, there's this concept of a modifier. And the modifier is basically the equivalent of the Windows key or the command key. So Windows key for Windows, obviously, and then the command key for macOS. So I'm going to select the Win key as my modifier, and you'll see the modifier key mentioned multiple times, but just keep in mind it either refers to the Windows key or the command key. So we do that. And now you can see our desktop is already a little bit different. We don't have that title bar across the top, that taskbar. We do have a really thin layer down here that's got some information baked into it, various monitors, system date and time, and I just think it's really clean. So what do we do? Well, we've opened our new i3 session. What I'm going to do is hit Windows and enter. So the mod key, which is Windows and enter, and that's going to spawn a shell for me. Great. So by default, whatever window you open is going to take up the available screen real estate. So if I hit Windows or mod key and enter again, we're going to get a second one, and it's going to basically split the windows horizontally. So because I want to be able to run multiple shells and perform different tasks in each of them, I can use the Windows and the arrow keys to move between them. So you can see this when I hit the arrow key, the highlighted window changes. So this is shell 2. And then if I do Windows and left, I can see shell 1. Awesome. So it's nice being able to open multiple windows in this horizontal fashion. But like I said, i3 is pretty flexible. So I'll just close some of these. And now I can change the orientation of the split. So if you've used Tmux before, you may be familiar with this. So if I hit Windows and H, and then I open another shell, it's going to be horizontal. If I hit Windows and V, and then open another shell, hey, look, it's split my pane vertically this time. So I really like the way that I can move around these different terminal windows that I've got open. I can decide on what layout that I like. I can resize them using Windows R and then just using the arrows keys to change the dimensions. It's a really flexible way, I find, of being able to navigate your workspace and avoid using the mouse as much as possible. So like many other window managers, i3 uses virtual desktops. So as you can see down here in the bottom left, we're on desktop number 1 now. And if I hit Windows and then 2, we've got a brand new desktop. So what I might do on this particular second desktop is launch a browser. So to do that, I hit Windows and the D key, which is a shortcut for a program called D menu. And I can just start typing in the application that I want, which is in Firefox. So you can see at the top here, I've typed Fire, and then it's suggesting Firefox for me. And I hit enter. And this is the first time starting up Firefox. So there we go. So now we've got 2 active desktops, desktop 1 and desktop 2. I can click on them, but that's not very i3-like. So I can use Windows 1, Windows 2, Windows 1, Windows 2 to switch between them. So that's really handy. And I think if you spend a bit of time getting used to how to navigate your desktop environment using the i3 key bindings, you'll find that it's a really pleasant way to work day to day. So with i3, this is just a really little introduction to how it works. One really valuable resource that I recommend is you just Google for the i3 cheat sheet. And I think it's called the reference card, actually. And here you can see the blue icon is your modifier key or your Windows key. So opening a new terminal, Windows enter, moving around, swapping windows with each other, going from full screen. So if I go back to my desktop 1, and let's say I'm working in this window here, and I want to actually blow it up and make it full screen because there's like a lot of text or log data that I need to look. I just hit Windows F. and then that takes up the whole screen, and then I hit Windows F again, and it returns to back where it was. Really cool. So I suggest you definitely spend a bit of time reading about this, learning about the different layout methods like stacking and tabbed. Okay, so we've gone through the basics of navigating i3 using the keyboard. We're able to move around the various tiled windows that we have. We know we can use the Windows Enter key to launch a shell. If I do Windows 2, I can go to my next desktop, and then I do Windows D, and I can launch an application. So I'll just launch Firefox here, and there we go. So let's switch back to desktop number 1. And I think this is just as a last little example of the power of i3. Let's add a custom key binding. So we know that by default, the Kali desktop environment will automatically lock the desktop after a period of inactivity. So if there's no mouse or keyboard input, and I think it's like 5 minutes goes by, then the desktop will be locked and you need to re-enter your password. I actually like to have a keyboard shortcut. So in Windows, it's the Windows L key, and that locks the screen immediately. I'm just in the habit of always locking my desktop when I walk away. So let's add this new key binding and just use it as an example of how you can customize i3 to be super tailored for your day-to-day workflow. So I'm going to edit the config file, which is in the home directory .config/i3/config. And this is the default configuration that was generated when we first logged in. So I'm just going to go to the very bottom, and we'll add a new line here. And the syntax is bind sim, which is a key binding command, mod, which represents the Windows key, shift, and just note that the S is capitalized for shift, and then O. So my key binding shortcut is going to be Windows key, shift, and O all pressed together. And when that key binding is seen, what I want to do is exec or run a program, and I'm going to run the i3 lock program, and I just need to pass this little parameter to it to make it lock immediately, and that will lock the screen for us. So let's test it out. If I quit out of here, and then I do Windows, Shift, and R, that is going to reload the config changes that I've just made. So you can see the screen's flashed, the config has been applied. So fingers crossed, let's test it out. If I do Windows, Shift, and O, my screen is immediately locked. The i3 lock program is run. So to unlock it, I simply start typing my password and hit enter, and there we go. We're all set up. So that brings us to the end of this video. I hope it's been useful for you. I know there's a lot of videos out there explaining how to install Kali Linux, but this is a little bit of a twist with some customization and getting things tailored to an environment that may suit you. If you're just getting started with the Linux desktop, maybe you're coming out of the Windows or Mac OS environment, you can choose just to leave the default window manager. It might be a little bit more familiar for you. But I do encourage some experimentation, because my experience is that when you start doing a lot of repetitive tasks, and my experience so far in learning cybersecurity has been there's a lot of repetitive tasks you try to automate over time, is that having the flexibility to change things and customize things is really, really useful. So this is just the basics. Like I mentioned, you can come up with your own tiling and virtual desktop arrangement that suits your needs. In my case, I generally have my tiled terminal or shell windows on desktop 1. I have Firefox on desktop 2. I have my note-taking app, Obsidian, on desktop 3. And then I might have some other GUI application like Burp or Zap on desktop 4. So I encourage you to go a bit further with i3. And the best resource is this reference card, which you can Google to learn some of the default shortcuts. It's not a whole lot to remember, but it's a super powerful environment to be working in, especially when you start doing some customization like we just walked through. Well, that's it. Thanks for sticking around, and I hope this was a useful guide in not only getting Kali Linux up and running on your local machine, but maybe inspire you to do some tweaks and customizations and really make your Kali installation your own. So I'm a new channel. Any like, subscribe, or comment is very much appreciated to help with getting this video out. If you have any questions, please comment below and I'll do my best to try and help you out. This has been Jono at Open Learn Sec. All the best and happy hacking.